Hello. Sorry this video is a bit late, but let's get started. Chapter 17. Jeff's Favor. Derek heard Ariel calling his name. It came out of darkness, out of fog, out of chilly air, until he finally opened his eyes and found himself looking up at her with some thick, tall grass waving behind her in the dim glow, suffusing the entire valley. He said nothing at first, trying to remember where they were. The surroundings were totally unfamiliar to him. "Derek, please wake up. We have to move again." Her voice was pleading. "Come on, I'll help you." Jeff got an arm under Derek and pulled him into a sitting position. "Where are we?" Derek asked, looking around. His voice was dry and hoarse. "What's happened?" "You fell asleep while Canhead was carrying you," said Ariel. "He's gone now." "You've been asleep for some time," said Jeff. "It must be the middle of the night by now. It's getting cold." Derek nodded, folding his arms and rubbing them. But Canhead must have reported the mugged robot to the central computer, probably right after he left us. "As to where we are," said Ariel, "Canhead led us down to the valley floor, kind of zigzagging and part way up the far slope. I think we're in a wheat field." Derek reluctantly let Jeff pull him to his feet. His whole body seemed to ache. He leaned against Jeff's shoulder, breathing hard, trying to gain his balance. "We woke you up because we have to keep going," said Ariel. "The hunters aren't going to stop for the night." "Have you got any more ideas, Derek?" Jeff asked. "Avery should have heard about the mugging by now." Derek shook his head, still trying to wake up. "I don't know what to expect. I don't know how long that news will take to have an effect either." He straightened up. "I meant to ask Canhead about the migration. Do you know where his assembly point is?" "Not really," said Jeff. "He went sideways across the slope when he left, but I imagine he was heading back to that one thoroughfare they were all using." "You don't dare try that," Derek muttered to himself. Ariel suddenly clenched his arm. She nodded toward something over her shoulder without speaking. Derek and Jeff turned to look. Far across the same slope, a humanoid figure was just barely distinguishable in the distance, coming toward them. "Let's go," Derek said, feeling a faint surge of excitement. "It's not on the migration route, so it must be a hunter, and it's sure to have seen us. I'm afraid it won't be long now." The three of them started along in the opposite direction, but Derek was just barely stumbling along. As before, the others each supported one of his arms across their shoulders. Derek realized with frustration that he was now too far gone for even the adrenaline in his system to make much difference. When they reached an intersecting row between the wheat field and a field of some low, bushy plants that he could not recognize, Jeff stopped and lowered Derek's arm. "Look, we'll have to split up." He looked back at the hunter, which was still distant but visibly closer. "Why bother?" Derek said wearily. "Maybe I can divert it somehow, and if they get me first I'm probably in the least danger from Avery. He doesn't have any business with me." "He's crazy," Ariel said sharply. "You can't expect rational behavior from him." "Well, maybe not, but splitting up is the best chance to keep Derek away from him a little longer. Maybe Avery will show himself in that extra time." Derek looked up to study his face. "You sure you want to take this much risk?" Jeff grinned at him and shrugged. "Hey, I said I owed you a favor, didn't I?" Derek gripped his arm for a moment in thanks, then turned and started up the slope. Ariel threw her arms around Jeff in a brief hug, and then hurried after Derek. Jeff moved a few meters down the slope and then got on all fours to crawl through the low bushes of the adjacent crop field. Derek leaned on Ariel for support as they plodded slowly up the furrow between the fields. In a moment the tall green Auroran-bred wheat had hidden them from immediate view of the hunter, but it would have noted the trio's movements and communicated them to the other hunters, wherever they were. Mandelbrot stood at the opening of one of the passes into the valley, looking out over the agricultural park. It was dimly lit, and he could just barely see, with his superior robot vision, tiny figures moving in the distance. He paused to study the entire valley. Some of the taller and thicker crops blocked his sight, but he could see a couple of humanoid robots moving straight up a row on the far slope. They were not behaving like hunters, and he suspected that they were migrating. Down in the valley floor he saw two large robots moving systematically among the rows of the crops, and was sure that they were hunters. Then, at another spot on the opposite slope, he saw a human figure crawling through one of the fields. As he watched helplessly, a lone hunter ran up behind him and lifted the human off the ground. From the lively struggle he knew that the human was not Derek, and he judged that Ariel was smaller. Above the struggle a short distance he located Derek and Ariel moving painfully and slowly as they wove their way among some short trees. Mandelbrot's programming and his understanding of the dangers posed by Dr. Avery placed Derek at the highest of his priorities. While the hunters were programmed with a narrow definition of duty that allowed them to detain humans without harming them, Mandelbrot had a larger perspective, and saw detention by the hunters as a first step toward virtually certain harm. At the moment, he would have to ignore Jeff's capture and help Derek and Ariel if he could. He noticed the positions and current movements of the hunters he could see, and started quickly down the slope. Derek and Ariel stumbled out of the far side of the fruit orchard onto a well-traveled footpath headed straight up and down the slope. "I'm totally lost," Derek wheezed. He stopped, bending forward to lean on his knees. "But this must be the migration route again. Look at all the robot footprints. This valley can't have very much foot traffic, and if it did, they would have paved this." Ariel nodded and prodded him up the slope, where the soft mud had been churned unevenly with heavy use. The irrigation was obviously turned on at regular intervals. "Come on," she breathed breathlessly. They had just started up the incline when a large figure stepped out of the crops above them. It threw a massive shadow as it started down the slope toward them. Derek looked up at the great bulk of a hunter as it moved toward them carefully, watching its precarious balance on the poor footing. "Come on," Ariel yanked him sideways back into the fruit orchard. "Hurry!" "I can't," he whispered apologetically. "Too weak to hurry." He followed her, though, until she halted abruptly a moment later. Another hunter was waiting for them in the trees ahead, a dark silhouette against the glow of light behind him. They turned again and found two more hunters pushing through the trees, breaking branches and shaking leaves as they did so, coming right up the slope without bothering to follow any rows and furrows. Their very silence and dispassionate demeanor discouraged rebellion. Derek leaned wearily on Ariel's shoulders, unable to struggle. She wrapped her arms around him, more for his sake, he guessed, than because she was scared. He glared helplessly at the nearest hunter. As he watched the hunter reaching for them, he saw a weirdly flexible robot arm curl around the hunter's neck from behind. It made a quick couple of motions, and the hunter froze, completely shut down. Derek blinked at it, too surprised to react. "Run!" Mandelbrot shouted, emerging from behind the hunter. His cellular arm, which Derek had long ago installed in order to disguise the normal robotic arm of the time, was now just stiffening back to normal. "Come on!" Ariel shoved Derek past Mandelbrot to put their protector between them and the hunters. They began stumbling through the trees again, their hope renewed by Mandelbrot. Ariel led him through a crooked trail, turning and twisting through the fruit trees in a clumsy, crashing route that ignored stealth entirely. At one point Derek caught on a leafy branch and had to pause to get out. He took the moment to peer back at Mandelbrot. 4 hunters had originally closed in on them. Mandelbrot had apparently pushed the controls on the first one to neutralize it, and then had attacked the other 3. By attacking them he had brought the third law into effect, forcing the hunters to protect themselves. This imperative overrode even the strongest programming, so they could not continue their pursuit until they had subdued Mandelbrot. Mandelbrot was outnumbered, but had the advantage of instructions to use his cellular arm. Further, in the close quarters among the trees, the greater size of the hunters impeded them. The struggle continued, buying Derek and Ariel more time as they hurried on. Ariel led the way until finally he reached out and grabbed her, too out of breath to speak up. She waited anxiously until he could, looking around fearfully. "Where are we going?" he panted. "I don't know. Anywhere. Just away." "Mandelbrot can't win that fight. He can only slow them down. Then it'll start all over again the same way." "Have you got a better idea?" she demanded. He nodded and got down on the ground among the trees. "I've been thinking about this park. The way that robot path is chewed up by the footprints and all. It means this park normally doesn't have an erosion problem." "Yeah? So?" "So these crops still need water, and it's obviously managed with their usual efficiency. If this valley is irrigated by underground pipes or something, we've had it. But I don't think the robots would do that, because leaves need external moisture too." "Get to the point, will you, or let's go." "Irrigation outlets. This valley has to have them in some form. If we turn them on, they'll eliminate our heat trail." "Well," she knelt down beside him, "they could be anywhere, and it's dark. Besides, Dirk, this is a high-altitude valley. Maybe the natural fog and rain take care of all that." "That'd be leaving too much to chance. We have to figure this out." "How?" He sat back and looked at her. His legs no longer hurt. They were nearly numb. "All right. Instead of looking at this at random, we have to work it out logically, like the robots would. Where would you place irrigation outlets for the greatest efficiency?" "How do I know?" "Well, I can hardly think at all." All right. Concentrate. Run a slope. Derek, come on, this way." He nodded and forced himself after her, stumbling on feet he could hardly feel. After a walk that seemed much longer than it could possibly have been, they stopped along a road between the trees that ran horizontally down the slope. Derek was now the one looking all around for hunters that could come from any direction. "They must use these furrows as a kind of terracing," said Ariel. "Think we're right in the middle of the vertical rows. If they put the irrigation spigots near here, they would lose the least amount of runoff down the slope. The same with fire control." "Sounds good to me," said Derek, collapsing to the ground again. "Let's find it." "If it's here," she added, joining him on the ground. "I've got something." Derek's hand had come across a small cylinder sticking up perhaps 15 centimeters from the surface of the ground. He got down low to look at it in the faint light. "Now what?" Ariel whispered, moving next to him. "It doesn't have any controls or anything. What if the sensors are somewhere else?" "It's possible," said Derek slowly, "but look how high it is. Why would they do that? They don't do anything sloppily here, or without a reason. They don't waste material either." "Derek, we can't just sit here and try to outguess them. Who knows?" She shook her head. "Maybe we should just keep running, huh?" He shook his head. "This is the only real chance we have left. Come on, help me bury it." "What?" "Hurry. Why else would it be so tall? This whole thing is its own sensor. It probably judges air, moisture, and precipitation and who knows what." "How do you know?" "I think they designed it at this height so it wouldn't be covered by minor shifts in the soil during hoeing and other care. If we cover it with dirt, it'll stop sensing. Come on." It was already scraping up the soft black soil, which the function robot seemed to keep churned constantly, and began packing it around the cylinder. She joined him without further argument. They found the soil damp enough to stick to the cylinder if they packed it hard, and before long it was covered. Derek wiped the dirt off his hands on some leaves. "Now what?" she asked, wiping her own hands. "Nothing's happening." Thank you all very much for listening, and very, very, very sorry about not having this ready for yesterday. Thank you all, and have a good day. Bye!